So what about number 3?
Okay, so keeping on with something, a little bit of the spiritual theme there. So the number 3 example that I have is the Counter Lord's Resistance Army example from Central Africa from 2011 to 2017 timeframe.
Okay.
As I've done with the last 2 examples, I'll give you a little bit of background. So since the late 1980s, a man named Joseph Kony, who was front page news several years ago, started a organization called Lord's Resistance Army in northern Uganda. This organization grew. It terrorized the civilian population in Uganda, killing, torturing, kidnapping tens of thousands of people. I think it was estimated around 30,000 children were kidnapped starting in 1987 for the next few decades. And so our Ugandan allies had difficulty. They were able to kind of contain the LRA, but not eliminate it. And finally, when it seemed like there was going to be some breakthrough with regard to kind of getting them to lay down their arms and stop terrorizing the population, those that more or less fell through, and the group sort of metastasized. It expanded throughout the region, and it started taking up territory in 4 different areas. Northern Uganda, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Democratic Republic of the Congo. They ended up kind of occupying or operating in a space roughly the size of California. So by 2011, it had gotten enough attention, and Kony had been declared actually a terrorist, and the LRA as a terrorist organization.
Right.
So that our political leadership opted to go ahead and deploy several dozen Army Special Operations Forces. That consisted a lot of special forces trying to train partner militaries to fight the LRA and succeed in those military engagements. But not a whole lot of thought was given to the psychological operations side of things. So there was actually 11 total PSYOP rotations to the counter LRA mission between 2011 and 2017. And one of the things that they learned very early on was an appreciation of knowing what they didn't know. And right intuitively, they touched base with the non-governmental organizations that were operating in that area. They already had the connections. They already had the cultural expertise, the language expertise. So they plugged in with a lot of their efforts. It took a little bit of time to do the assessments, to work with special forces teams on the ground, with local community leaders, with the NGOs, non-governmental organizations. But it took a little bit of time. But there was 2 sort of things that kicked it into gear. One was the YouTube release of Kony 2012. By the NGO Invisible Children.
I remember hearing
so that. Kony 2012 really gave the counter LRA mission a huge boost in visibility and political buy-in. So that sort of gave them a lot more room to operate in. The second was the arrest of LRA officer senior leader named Caesar Achelem. Caesar Achelem did not give up willingly. But when he did end up turning himself in or getting arrested, he cooperated fully with American forces, specifically PSYOP. So he lent his voice, his picture to all sorts of PSYOP products. And what that did was sort of set in motion almost a snowball effect, where LRA members, and around this time it numbered probably around 500 fighters or so.
Okay.
But he started identifying people by name. And so PSYOP soldiers on the ground, working with NGOs, working with community leaders, found the families of these specific individuals, recorded statements from their families, from their mothers, built them into radio products, built them into loudspeaker products, put them on leaflets and so on. And so there's almost a very surgical approach to hollowing out the LRA, essentially, of its senior leadership. When they flew low altitude helicopter missions, they found that the LRA fighters would scatter, which would give them the opportunity to defect if they wanted to. One of the reasons why this was important was because Joseph Kony, I mentioned the spiritual side of things, he was very much seen as almost had a cult of personality. People thought that he had supernatural powers, that he had the ability to curse them. So he used that as a way to manipulate and keep a psychological hold on his fighters. So it was very difficult to get this idea across, convincing enough to get them to defect. But when they start seeing other leaders on there saying, "No, I'm fine. I'm in custody. I'm reunited with my family," by name, and then they fly the low altitude missions, gives them the opportunity to run away, and it starts building breaking down. So by early 2017, the LRA had been reduced largely because of PSYOP efforts down to less than 100 fighters or so, and they declared the mission a success. And it's just a really good example of PSYOP ingenuity, resourcefulness, and precision in operations.
Right. Wow. That's awesome too. Man, these are actually really, I mean, I was thinking I would know some of them, but again, just the details to them, I hadn't heard anything. So was it specifically, you're saying it was the members or family members of some of these people that were then really, I mean, were the messages kind of pleading them to sort of, like desist and stop what they were doing? And was that kind of the general trend or the general theme?
Yes. Okay. By name. By the specific leader.
Wow.
And so it hollowed out much of the senior LRI leadership.
Right.
And because the organization had very tight unit cohesion, very rigid rank structure, when the fighters start seeing their leaders turning themselves in and reunited, hey, it's not, we're okay. That has a pretty profound psychological impact on the rest of the force.
Yeah, at that point, it's almost probably just like a domino effect.
It is.
From there, so.